Okay, hi everybody. So we are going to read chapter 12 today. You did have to read chapters 10 and 11 on your own, so I did want to review those with you. So chapter 10 was called The Spell Begins to Break. We know in that chapter that is when everybody leaves to go to the stone table to meet Aslan. On their way, the beaver leads them to a cave to rest. They are awoken by bells. So automatically they're thinking of the witch on her sledge when we find out that it's actually not the witch at all, that it is Father Christmas or Santa Claus. And the idea of him coming there is showing that the spell is beginning to break, because in Narnia, it's always winter and never Christmas. But now that we have Father Christmas coming into play, that does show that that the spell is breaking. So Father Christmas does give some gifts away. So to Mr. Beaver, we know that his dam is going to be fixed. To Mrs. Beaver, she's going to get a new sewing machine. We have Peter, who's going to get a sword and a shield. Susan, who's going to get a bow and arrow and a horn, and that horn is going to be used for anytime there's danger or distress. And Lucy gets a dagger, and she also gets a cordial that has a potion. So it's just like a little bottle. And what it does is it's going to heal anybody if they need that. Okay. So then chapter 11 is called Aslan is Near, and we switch to Edmund's perspective at this point. So we know that he's with the White Witch. He asks her for Turkish delight, and she is not willing to give that to him. And I think he's starting to realize just right then and there that she is not who she claims to be. He does receive some bread and water because they are going to be going out to try to find the others, and she doesn't want him to be famished or extremely tired with that. She also commands Mogram to go over to the beaver's house and to kill anybody that he finds there. And it is, again, at that point, too, that Edmund really does start to realize, well, she is not the queen. She is, in fact, a witch. On the way to the stone table to find the others, they do see a party of animals that are having a feast. And the White Witch asked, well, where did you get that? And they told her Father Christmas. That's when she realizes, oh my gosh, the spell is starting to break. So she does turn them all into stone. She also starts to realize that the sledge isn't moving, and that's because the snow is melting. Her dwarf little sidekick ends up mentioning that it's because of Aslan, and her response to that was, anybody who mentions his name again will be killed. So that leads us to chapter 12, which is called Peter's First Battle. So I'm going to go ahead and, oops, sorry guys. I'm going to do a share screen so you guys can follow along with the novel as it's online. Okay, so here we go with chapter 12. While the dwarf and the White Witch were saying this, miles away, the beavers and the children were walking on hour after hour into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago, they had left the coats behind them, and by now they had even stopped saying to one another, look, there's a kingfisher, or I say bluebells. Those are different types of flowers. Or, what was that lovely smell? Or, just listen to that thrush. They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight into cool green thickets and out again into wide mossy glades where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into the dense masses of flowering currant and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. They had been just as surprised as Edmund when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. But they all knew that it was her spells which had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong and badly wrong, and the witch's schemes. And after the thaw had been going on for some time, they realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that, they didn't hurry much, and they allowed themselves more rests and longer ones. Let me scroll down, get it on there. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but not what I call bitterly tired, only slow and feeling rather dreamy, and quite inside, as one does when one is coming to the end of a long, quiet inside as one does when one is coming to the end of a long day in the open. Susan had a slight blister on her heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right, that meant a little to the south, to reach the place of the stone table. Even if it had not been their way, they couldn't have kept to the river valley once the thaw began, for with all that melting snow, the river was soon in flood, a wonderful, roaring, thundering yellow flood, and their path would have been under water. And now the sun got low and the light got redder and the shadows got longer and the flowers began to think about closing. Not long now, said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep, springy moss. It felt nice under their tired feet, in a place where only tall trees grew, very wide apart. The climb, coming at the end of the long day, made them all pant and blow. And just as Lucy was wondering whether she could really get to the top without another long rest, suddenly they were at the top. And this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest, spreading as far as one could see in every direction, except right ahead. There, far to the east, was something twinkling and moving. By gum, whispered Peter to Susan, the sea. In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of gray stone supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion pitched out on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of what looked like yellow silk and cords of crimson and tent pegs of ivory, and high above it on a pole a banner which bore a red rampant lion fluttering in the breeze, which was blowing in their faces from the far-off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right. And turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. We scroll this down. Aslan stood in the center of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of a half moon. There were tree women there and well women, dryads and naiads, as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments. It was they who had made the music. There were 4 great centaurs. The horse part of them was like a huge English farm horses, and the man part was stern but beautiful giants. There was also a unicorn and a bull with the head of a man and a pelican, and an eagle and a great dog. And next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other carried his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great, royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes. And then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembly. Go on, whispered Mr. Beaver. No, whispered Peter, you first. No, sons of Adams before animals, whispered Mr. Beaver back again. Susan, whispered Peter, what about you? Ladies first. No, you're the eldest, whispered Susan. And of course, the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward they felt. Then at last Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew his sword and raised it to the salute, and hastily saying to the others, Come on, pull yourselves together. He advanced onto the lion and said, We have come, Aslan. Welcome, Peter, son of Adam, said Aslan. Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he-beaver and she-beaver. His voice was deep and rich and somehow took the fidgets out of them. They now felt glad and quiet and didn't seem awkward to them and stand and say nothing. But where is the 4th? Asked Aslan. He has tried to betray them and join the White Witch, O Aslan, said Mr. Beaver, and then something made Peter say, That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong. And Aslan said nothing. either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them that there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "And all shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her that he looked sad as well. But next minute, that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy, if he didn't know how to velvet them, and said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy on Peter's shoulder, and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off sight of the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forests and hills and valleys, and winding away like a silver snake, the lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea. And beyond the sea, the sky was full of clouds, which were just turning rose color with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact, at the mouth of the great river, there was something on a little hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflecting from all of the windows which looked toward Peter and the sunset. But to Peter, it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, oh man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel, of the 4 thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king all over the rest." So there again, we have that the Cair Paravel, so we know that that's where the White Witch does not want them to go. And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. A bugle is a horn. "It is your sister's horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, so low as to be almost a purr, if at not, or purr, if at is not, sorry, my book, I have a star on it, is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment, Peter did not understand. Then, when he saw all of the other creatures start forward, he heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back, let the prince win his spurs." He did understand, and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running toward him as fast as her short legs could carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for a tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first, Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like an Alatesian, which is a big dog, though it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized that it was a wolf standing on its hind legs with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or two above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she did not get higher, or at least try to take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just going to faint, and that if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick, but that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never touched the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned round, its eyes flaming and its mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though all of this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all, he had just time to duck down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later, he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off of his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then, after a bit, Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides. But in Narnia, no one thinks any worse of you for that. Quick, quick, shouted the voice of Aslan. Centaurs, eagles. I see another wolf in the thickets. There, behind you. He has just darted away. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam. And instantly there was a thunder of hooves and beating of wings, and dozens or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan at close hand. You have forgotten to clean your sword, said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam, said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, Rise up, Sir Peter, Wolfsbane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword. Okay, so we have, that was huge for Peter, right, in this chapter. We know that he had to really execute his bravery in order to save his sisters. So you will have to answer the comprehension questions that go along with this chapter. Then the next day, I simply want you to look over the vocabulary for chapter 13, and then we will go from there. All right, guys. See you next time.